Story 1. What a terrible day to be literate. I want to stop, but I keep reading these comments. Story 2. My father's kidney stone. I know this sounds messed up. I was an idiot when I was 11. I probably had 3 brain cells fighting for air most of the time. I came home from school. No one was home, and I saw a package of Nerds candy on the table. Beside it was a paper towel with a single black nerd. Curious, I decided not to think about it and ate it. It was gritty and horrible. It did not taste like much, and I chalked it up to an error at the candy factory. About an hour later, I was playing games on the family computer when I heard my dad yell, "Where's my kidney stone?" I replied in anguish, "I ate it." I cried, my parents laughed hysterically, and my dad had to tell his doctor that his kid had eaten his kidney stone thinking it was candy. My nickname for years was Nerd. Not my proudest moment. Story 3. That drink they give you in the hospital when you have to get a colonoscopy. Not the bottled one, but the powder dissolved in water. I could not drink it. I tried so hard. It was the worst tasting thing I have ever had. I earned myself an extra day in the hospital and another whole round because I did not drink enough the first day. I was convinced I was in hell. Story 4. I was going to make buttercream frosting for a cake and kept tasting it as I went to make sure the flavor was on point. I noticed something a bit off and slightly gooey, and finally saw small moths in the frosting. I guess they had gotten into the powdered sugar, and I had been eating moths the whole time. After vomiting in the sink and dumping that batch, I found a recipe that didn't require powdered sugar, and that is how I discovered ermine frosting. I've never looked back. Story 5. I have a weird phobia. I have to rinse out every glass before I use it, even at my own house or when it is a plastic cup. It stems from when I was in 5th grade and stayed over at a friend's house. My friend's mother was a hoarder, but this was before anyone knew that term and I was too young to know it. Her refrigerator was the typical overstocked warm mess you see on television. She made me a glass of Ovaltine for breakfast after a sleepover, and on top it had bits of crystalline residue you get when dishwashers are not cleaned regularly, plus a few random dog hairs. I did not want to drink it, but she said I had to, so I drank it. It was lukewarm, with bits floating on top. I have rinsed every single glass I touched since then, and even my good friends rinse one for me when I am over. Story 6. Kani miso. I saw it on the sushi train menu and thought it was miso and crab. Kani miso is made from a crab's brains and internal organs. It tasted like rancid seafood with the texture of wet cement. I was with Japanese teachers hosting us on a school trip, so I swallowed out of politeness. I covertly wrapped the second piece in a napkin and carried it down the street to dispose of it in a bin out of sight of the teachers. Story 7. I opened a bottle of Mountain Dew to make a cocktail. Not only did I waste a large amount of vodka, but I also inadvertently swallowed my friend's urine. I spent the next 10 minutes gagging and afterward lost my tolerance for noxious smells. Story 8. On my first date, I took my girlfriend to a fancy restaurant. I was trying hard to impress her. We shared a charcuterie appetizer. There was a mustard-like condiment she did not want to try. I like mustard, so I said I would try it. To this day, I have never tasted anything more repulsive or texturally traumatizing. I gagged uncontrollably while she laughed so hard. We've been married for 6 years. Story 9. 11 30-milligram Adderall tablets in one day. I think I permanently damaged my heart. That, or the cat turd I thought was an almond. Story 10. I was drinking a Coke in the dark and swallowed a rain spider that had gotten in. Story 11. As a teenager, I lived in an old farmhouse in the Australian wheat belt that was infested with rats. We used poison, and they would die in the ceiling, stinking out the whole house for days. One night, I made a grilled cheese toast tie under the gas grill. I started eating it when my brother asked what was underneath it. I turned it over, and the bottom of the bread was covered in bright green poisoned rat droppings. Story 12. I swallowed a small watch battery when I was 6 years old, and I'm still here. I also ate powdered carpet cleaner as a little kid. Story 13. When I was 3, my sibling and I were playing with coins in our mouths. My sibling said the coin was too big, so I said, "Oh yeah? Watch this," and accidentally swallowed the coin. Story 14. A veterinary nurse I worked with pulled a date out of her scrub pocket and bit into it. Turned out not to be a date but dog feces. Story 15. A cockroach had climbed into my coffee cup. Since the coffee was black, I did not see it. I knocked back the rest of it, and by the time I realized what it was, I had already started to swallow. Story 16. This is why I never eat in the dark, even when we're watching a movie. I want to see what I'm eating. Story 17. Bought an artisanal blue cheese from a cheese shop once. I love blue cheese, so I was excited. Unfortunately, that was the day I learned that in the cheese world, artisanal is apparently code for saying they accidentally made the worst possible product and need a fancy buzzword to make it sell. You know how normal blue cheese is super creamy, sharp, and tangy? This had none of that. Tasted like a skunk-infested rainy barnyard. The taste in my mouth was identical to skunk spray, wet hay, and cow manure. No matter how much I brushed my teeth and ate breath mints, the taste remained for 24 hours. Story 18. When I was 2 or 3, I drank white spirit I found under the cupboards, thinking it was lemonade. That is turpentine if you are in the United States. I had to have my stomach pumped. Story 19. An extra-long ramen noodle got stuck. One end was deep in my throat and the other remained in my mouth. After I realized I could still breathe, I swallowed and chased it with a drink. It was incredibly uncomfortable. I was not sure I would make it. Then I went back to eating. Story 20. A friend drove me to a party. I opened a beer, dropped the pull tab into the can, and took a few sips. We stopped at a convenience store and then drove on. Later, I took a gulp and felt something land in my mouth. I spat it into my hand. It was not the pull tab, it was a cockroach. Story 21. The water came from my wife's cup that held her false teeth. Story 22. My own vomit. I had reconstructive jaw surgery 2 years ago. They wired my mouth and jaw shut for the first 2 to 3 months. Given my medical history, which included chemotherapy, I tend to react badly to postoperative medications. I asked how I was supposed to vomit if the painkillers prescribed after surgery made me sick. The doctor stared at me in silence and said we could hope I would not vomit and that they could prescribe antiemetic medication just in case. The antiemetic medication they prescribed helped very little. Swallowing my own vomit was a 0 out of 10 experience. If I could give it negative stars, I would. Story 23. As I scroll through each one, I think, EW. That one is even worse. EW, this is gross. That's terrible. This is so disgusting. Yet I keep scrolling. Story 24. Cigarette ash mixed with stale beer. You know how it is when you've run out of drinks at the party. Story 25. I went to my girlfriend's house and her mother made flautas. Growing up, I had only ever eaten them at my mom's and I would devour them. My girlfriend and her family used proper etiquette, with base plates for plates and cups and separate plates for each food item. Things I never did. I grabbed a flauta and bit into it. I wondered why there was such a hard crunch. I assumed it had been over-fried. Not wanting to look uncultured, I swallowed it, and it scratched my throat. I went for a second flauta and the same thing happened. There was no way they were so burnt yet still held together with that hard texture. I fished the hard piece out of my mouth and realized it was a toothpick. My girlfriend's mother had left toothpicks in when serving, whereas my mother had always removed them. I had never realized toothpicks were used in cooking. Story 26. There were ants and weevils, many of them. Every time I brewed a cup of tea or coffee, I would find floating black bits in the cup. I used to think it was just from the coffee grounds or the tea bag, but I was wrong. One day, when I poured milk into my coffee, the floating bits became clearly visible as insects. I inspected my kettle and found many dead weevils and ants inside. I now wash my kettle much more frequently. Story 27. Apparently, when I was little, I broke and swallowed my grandmother's real pearl necklace. My family had to check my stool repeatedly to collect the pearls so the necklace could be restrung. Story 28. A leaf. I still feel it in my throat like a double-sided razor. Story 29. I swallowed a radioactive iodine pill as part of my cancer treatment. Story 30. I learned the hard way that an ex did not wash his anus, penis, or testicles at all. I can't describe the smell. Oral sex was virtually impossible, and I'm not proud that it took me so long to realize the cause. I developed such severe bacterial vaginosis from him that I required 3 months of antibiotics and developed pelvic inflammatory disease, despite not having a typical sexually transmitted disease. He also didn't wash his bedding. Story 31. Growing up, my grandma was notorious for losing her fingernails while she cooked. My family has pretty poor fingernails. I have broken mine just turning on my car with a push-button start. The family tradition was $10 every time you found grandma's fingernails. Unfortunately, you did not get paid if you ate them, which is why I am not a millionaire today. I was too afraid of getting in trouble for spitting out food. Story 32. Once I poured a glass and it looked fine. I took a swig and it tasted fine, but the second drink produced a large lump of curdled milk. Story 33. When I was younger, I found a quarter near my bed and was so excited that I didn't want to lose it. So I put it in my mouth before falling asleep. I pooped it out the next day and cried because it had poop on it. Story 34. When I was a kid, I accidentally took Ipecac instead of cold medicine and added vomiting to my cold symptoms. Story 35. I dropped a plate with food on it once, and it looked fine, so I just put it all back together. Once I finished, I realized the plate was now chipped and the hard bits I ate were part of the plate. Story 36. When I was a child, I had a bouncy ball stuck in my throat. Luckily, it came out. Otherwise, I probably would have died that day. That trauma taught me not to swallow non-food items. Laughing out loud. Story 37. When I was pledging my fraternity years ago, we had to play an elimination game to see who could drink increasingly gross concoctions without vomiting. I tapped out at a mixture of coffee grounds, pickle juice, cottage cheese, orange juice, mayonnaise, relish, mustard, onions, and chopped sardines. Reading it does not sound gross, but thinking about the texture makes me want to gag. Story 38. As a teenager, I went to my dad's house for a long weekend. When I returned to my mom's, I realized I had left some apple juice on my nightstand and it had developed mold on top. It was late, so I went straight to sleep and planned to dump it in the morning. I woke up in the middle of the night, half-conscious and very thirsty, and took a couple of quick sips before I fully woke up. I still remember what it tasted like. Sometimes my brain reminds me of it out of nowhere. It was horrible. Story 39. I was drinking beer outside with my friends and smoking. I picked up my beer and drank it before realizing that people had been extinguishing cigarettes in my leftover drink. Thinking it was empty, I immediately started vomiting. Tasted terrible. Story 40. I saw a man accidentally drink water that was contaminated with cat feces. Story 41. This is not mine. I saw a TikTok of a woman who said she always eats rice in bed. Every time she found a grain of rice, she ate it, only to learn her cat had parasites and she had been eating eggs that fell from the cat's anus. Story 42. I was holding my baby cousin up in the air when he projectile vomited into my mouth. Story 43. 2 hours ago, I swallowed old pineapple juice that had been left open in the fridge too long. When I poured it out, it was black. I couldn't see inside the container, so I had no idea and didn't stop to smell it. Pro tip from TikTok. Take a shot of liquor after you eat or drink something bad. It may help prevent food sickness. It worked for me. Story 44. I chugged spoiled chocolate milk from the school cafeteria straight from the carton. I had already taken a big gulp before I realized it was like jelly and tasted sour. Story 45. I knew a guy who, as a teenager, partied and smoked weed. Once, high and thirsty, he took a big gulp from a soda can and discovered it was the communal spit can. He never smoked weed again. Story 46. A friend and I were smoking meth out of a glass pipe when he spilled the hot liquid on my hairy forearm. Not wanting to waste a drop of the drug, he immediately licked it off my arm. I've never seen anyone change color and vomit that quickly. The combination of burned skin, singed hair, and crystal meth was foul-smelling. I can't imagine how it tasted. Story 47. I accidentally swallowed a pickled plum seed while eating it, and it hurt a lot. Story 48. It was a suppository laxative. It was very large, and I did not know what a suppository was. Story 49. On my first day at a new job, I took a few bites of a granola bar I had packed and immediately wondered if it contained walnuts, even though it was labeled almond and chocolate. I am allergic to walnuts. I discreetly spit it out and read the ingredients. Yes, walnuts. I went to the bathroom and washed my mouth with the hand soap, using it like toothpaste and mouthwash, gargled and swallowed some. It was awful, but to my surprise it helped avoid a serious reaction and I was relieved. I had a panic attack and stayed in the bathroom about 20 minutes waiting to see if I would have a reaction. When I got home, I looked at the box, a Target brand generic granola bar, and there was no mention of walnuts on the front, only in the ingredients list on the back. Now I am traumatized and do not trust any granola bars. Disclaimer: I understand the limits of my nut allergy. Do not wash your mouth with soap if you could have a severe anaphylactic reaction. Seek medical help if needed. Story 50. Barium sulfate is a radiographic contrast agent that you must drink for some medical tests. I have a messed up stomach, so I have had to undergo several tests with it over the years. The thought of it makes me nauseous. Story 51. I was lying on my back, playing with my baby brother and tossing him up and down. He laughed until he vomited into my mouth. It is all fun and games until it is not. Story 52. I was in the hospital because my potassium was low. I was given a large potassium pill, and about an hour later I received a shot glass-sized dose of liquid potassium. It was thick, slightly sweet, and extremely salty. I drank a cup of water to begin to get the taste out of my mouth. Story 53. A large moth flew into the car while I was carsick in the back. I opened the window a couple of inches to breathe fresh air. The moth flew into my mouth and went to the back of my throat. I swallowed it. I bet it was more startled than I was. They stopped the car and I vomited on the pavement. I can still taste it when I think about it. Story 54. I vomited a peanut butter Larabar the other day. The slug-like and poo-like feeling of the first half rising in my esophagus was so gross that I tried to swallow the second half as I vomited it. I was unsuccessful. 0 out of 10. Do not recommend. Story 55. When I was 18, we had a big party at my grandfather's ranch. After drinking the whole night, I woke up terribly hungover. I went to the fridge, saw a Coca-Cola bottle and drank from it, then realized it was pig's blood. He had stored it there to use for the sausages he makes. It was a horrible experience. I vomited all over the kitchen and learned a lesson to always check what is in a bottle before drinking it. Story 56. I made a moldy liverwurst sandwich in the dark. It was crunchy. When I turned on the light, it was green and fuzzy. Story 57. I bought surgical soap to disinfect my piercing because I had a hot ear. It was bright pink. I poured it into a glass with some water, ready to put my piercing in, and placed it right next to my glass of Ribena. I picked up the wrong one. It burned for about 3 days and tasted like battery acid. Story 58. I was eating rice when I accidentally inhaled a grain that got stuck. I made weird noises for the rest of the day while trying to dislodge it. Felt like it was between my sinuses and my throat. I could feel it but could do little about it. Story 59. When I was 9, I had a pretty tough relationship with my stepfather. He never had a good approach to discipline and would punish me in harsh ways, such as making me sit in a corner or placing me on the naughty chair for weeks at a time. One day I did something, which I have forgotten, that resulted in my being grounded and locked in my room. I was not allowed to eat or drink and could only leave the house for school. While grounded, on my way home from school, I went into the public toilets near the park, used them, and noticed an open pack of Minion gummies lying on the floor. I was very hungry. I picked up the packet, took it home, and ate them. Half of the open packet had been on that bathroom floor. I became very ill, but luckily I did not need to see a doctor. I now regret what I did because most public toilets are unsanitary and the consequences could have been worse. Summary: I was starved and grounded in my room and ate gummy sweets from a public bathroom floor. Story 60. I accidentally drank from a beer can filled with cigarette butts at a barbecue. How I didn't throw up is beyond me. Story 61. Panadol cold and flu makes me gag. Just thinking about it almost causes the same reaction. Story 62. Chicken fetus. I made an egg sandwich. I didn't see the small growth it contained. When I bit down on it, my mouth was filled with the strong taste of liver and iron. I will never forget it. It was absolutely vile, and I stopped eating eggs until recently. I still think of them as liquid meat, which doesn't help. Story 63. Mangrove worm is bush tucker. Like an oyster but several feet long. Oh my God. I might fry it with Worcestershire sauce and eat it the same way I eat oysters. It looked like a 3-foot-long loogie and tasted like I had the worst cold, with a metallic aftertaste. I would have been happier to be starving than to eat it. Story 64. Thank God. A friend of mine told me he was in his house eating a ho-ho. He dropped a piece on the floor, retrieved it, and popped it into his mouth, only to realize afterward that it was cat feces. Story 65. Pieces of my teeth fell out. I struggled with alcohol but have been sober for a while. I neglected my oral hygiene for far too long. While eating, I noticed the food was gritty and hard. It was a piece of my tooth. I was not even eating anything hard. This has happened 3 times now. I take care of myself these days, but I cannot undo the damage I already did. Story 66. Something called snus. I'm Norwegian. Snus is a moist, smokeless powdered tobacco that people put under their lip. The box has a compartment for used snus, but people often discard it carelessly, which makes me angry. I don't use snus, but I was at a party and apparently someone put their snus in my drink without my knowledge. I drank the rest thinking it was soda. The snus dissolved and it was the nastiest taste I have ever experienced. I had never tried snus before, and I will not try it. I got sick, threw up, left, and never went to another party after that. Story 67. One yogurt tasted off, though the other from the same pack that day was fine. I was eating at work and felt like I could not spit it out, so I played it cool. I did not eat the rest and finished my coffee, and I have not eaten those yogurts since. Story 68. I accidentally chewed a paracetamol tablet, the Dutch Tylenol. The flavor was all-consuming and disgusting. It was chalky and extremely bitter, like a chemical factory exploding in my mouth. It did not literally taste like feces, but it was how I had imagined that taste. A lingering, dreadful bitterness. My face stayed in a scowl all day. Nothing I ate to mask the flavor could make it go away. Felt as if it stained my mouth for several hours. Story 69. I was eating cornflakes when an ant climbed onto my spoon. The tiny insect did not taste good at all. Story 70. When I was a kid, a small fish bone got stuck in my throat at dinner. It left a scratchy feeling for a couple of days afterward. Story 71. I got very drunk and set a big beer stein of water beside the bed for when I would inevitably wake up parched. I woke up, drained the water, and went back to sleep. Later, I woke up needing to vomit, grabbed the nearest large receptacle and vomited, then went back to sleep. I woke up again thirsty, had forgotten the earlier events, and took a big swig of my own tepid vomit. Good times. Story 72. My wife brought home an unsweetened iced green tea. We live in Thailand. It had a rather bitter taste, so I added some sugar. But what looked like sugar in an unmarked container turned out to be salt. Yuck. Story 73. My late wife and I were in a favorite Asian restaurant. Somehow she felt she had to choose a meal from the Asian menu because it was authentic. I went along, looking for something different. A young Caucasian waitress came to take our order. My wife ordered whatever. I asked the waitress what a sea cucumber was. She said she did not know. I asked if it was an animal or a vegetable. She quickly replied vegetable. So I ordered one. When it arrived, it looked like a weird bratwurst with some seaweed and other vegetables. I began to eat it. It was flavorless, very firm, like clear, unflavored gelatin or gumdrops. Not delicious, not horrible, just there. I ate most of it but left some, and we left after my wife finished. A few weeks passed. I was on the couch with the television for background noise, reading a magazine. I heard the word sea cucumber on a National Geographic show and looked up. It was a worm-like creature that, when frightened by a predator, expels its gut as a decoy to escape. Fascinating and disgusting, and since I had recently eaten one, very disturbing. My first thought was to vomit, but then I realized whatever I had eaten had been flushed away 3 weeks earlier. I was upset with my wife's obsession with Asian menus and wanted to scold whoever had told her that nonsense. Next time we ordered Asian, I ordered my Kung Pao beef. Story 74. Woodlice as a child, chicken liver as an adult, and improperly gutted fish all tasted the same. Story 75. There was a roach in my drink, but I spat it out. Should I have swallowed it? I do not know. I guess ballot, but that was on purpose. Story 76. I was about 10 years old and had been drinking a Dr. Pepper out of a can one summer. I ran outside to play with friends and returned thirsty for a sweet carbonated soda. A friend who was visiting my parents happened to be a smoker. Nobody in my household smoked, so I was unaware that aluminum cans are used to dispose of cigarettes. I was introduced to Dr. Pepper's 24th flavor and have not wanted cigarettes or Dr. Pepper since. Story 77. When my younger brother was a baby and I was about 12, I held him above my head like he was an airplane. He liked it as I was making wee sounds because that is the sound planes make. I ended up with a mouth full of vomit. In a panic, I swallowed. Story 78. When my baby was about 5 months old, she projectile vomited directly into my mouth while I was feeding and burping her. Story 79. I once put a frog in a glass of water and drank it. The frog had urinated in the water. It tasted very bitter. Story 80. Attempt, dog, cable, beneficial, subsequent, ripe, terrific, treatment, KG, lip. Story 81. In a club in the 2000s, my lips were wet after a sip of my pint. I lit a cigarette, kept it in my mouth while inhaling, and put my 20 Embassy No. 1 cigarettes and my lighter in my top pocket. I sucked the whole lit cigarette down my throat. It did not touch the sides or feel like anything except that it was extinguished in my stomach. Story 82. It was okra for me until I started eating it with curd. Story 83. When I was a kid, I got a bouncy ball stuck in my throat. Luckily, it came out. Otherwise, I probably would have died that day. That trauma taught me not to swallow certain things. Laughing out loud. Story 84. When I was in college, I drank a lot of Diet Coke and smoked many cigarettes. I used empty Diet Coke cans as ashtrays. One night, I drank from the wrong can and got a mouthful of cigarette ashes and butts. I might have been a little drunk. Story 85. I accidentally took a full gulp from someone else's spit cup containing shredded chewing tobacco after confusing it with mine. Story 86. I stayed at a friend's house. In the morning, I poured oatmeal and heated it in the microwave. After taking a big spoonful, I realized it was full of maggots that I had microwaved. It was horrific. My friend couldn't stop laughing. Story 87. When I was 12, we were boating and the motor suddenly stopped working. We were almost at the end, so we called the number on the boat and help arrived in about 3 minutes. The man checked our boat, and when he touched a small hose it sprayed a bit of gasoline on me and even a little into my mouth. I do not remember any flavor, so I do not think I swallowed much. It was just a tiny drop. Story 88. I went to visit my boyfriend, who was staying with 2 other roommates in an apartment. 3 men in their mid-20s were living together. I was young and did not want to make a scene. I wanted a drink, but they did not have anything except alcohol and milk that looked suspicious. I decided to get some ice instead, since it was a hot day and it would melt quickly even inside the apartment. My boyfriend asked why I had taken the ice. I said it was the only ice available. He said okay, then looked at me with a guilty, terrified expression. I shrugged it off, thinking it might belong to someone else. The other roommates were not home at the time. When one roommate came home, he went straight to the fridge and asked where his ice was. I had only met these roommates once before. I went to the kitchen and told him I had taken 2 ice cubes. He looked extremely worried. I began to suspect something was in the ice, perhaps an illegal substance or alcohol. I had not consumed either, so I was a little worried. At that point, I had only ingested about a quarter of the melted ice cubes and felt no effects. My boyfriend took me back to his room, sat me on his bed, and told me that the other two roommates had a strange practice of sharing bodily fluids. The ice cubes had been left in the freezer for one roommate and had not been removed because they did not expect me to be there. It was semen. These men had been ejaculating into each other's ice and drinks so they could share fluids. Note that my boyfriend was not involved in this. Summary: my boyfriend invited me over, did not remove the ice trays, and I ate ice that contained semen. Story 89. I encountered some absolutely nasty aquarium water when I was siphoning it to drain the tank. Story 90. Not me, but my mom. She was opening a can of chili one day. As she reached the bottom, she noticed something inside and started shaking it. When she took it out, it was a whole furry rat. She freaked out and put it in the freezer, but she never did anything about it because she was too traumatized to confront what had happened until years later. I wish she had done something because we could have been rich. Story 91. I mixed Coca-Cola with Windex. It did not taste that bad, but I had to go to the hospital afterward. Story 92. The worst thing I had to swallow was the horrible news that Harris lost the election. Story 93. I was drunk once and went to my room and got kinda hungry, so I picked up a cookie from my table and started eating it. It turned out to be one of those black bugs that bite you. Story 94. As a toddler, I drank rubbing alcohol after swiping the bottle off the counter. My parents called poison control and were told to wait it out. I am 36 and still here. Story 95. I had dengue fever a few years ago. There was no medicine. I don't know if that has changed. My doctor recommended drinking papaya leaf puree. It was extremely bitter. I would swallow it and half would come back into my mouth, so I had to swallow it again. This continued for a few days until I added lime juice, which made it much better. Later, televisions began showing that you could eat pomegranate and kiwi fruit, and there were even papaya leaf extract tablets. Story 96. A fly. I was starting to inhale because I was about to sneeze when a fly flew across my mouth and went down. I felt it batting its wings in my throat, and I coughed, canceling the sneeze. It was a very strange feeling. Story 97. When I was a kid, I ate a large cube of ice that was fresh from the freezer and could not breathe as it slowly melted on its way down. I thought I was going to die. Story 98. A sandwich drenched in water as part of a dare. I'm fine with century eggs, ballot, duck blood, kasumarzu, snails, frogs, cow tongue, and crickets. Soggy bread is really gross, though. Story 99. I did the one chip challenge a few years ago. It was the hottest thing I have ever eaten, but that part was not bad. Having it in my stomach was a nightmare. I had food poisoning for the rest of the night. Story 100. I found a moldy Pop-Tart. I was ravenous during my period and saw it on top of the fridge. I opened it quickly without thinking and started eating. Tasted odd, and I saw rainbow-colored mold. My husband, who has attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, said he had tried to eat it but noticed it was moldy. Apparently the best place to put it was on top of the fridge. Story 101. I took a drink from my Mountain Dew can that I had left on the coffee table a few hours earlier. My mother's boyfriend at the time had earlier decided this can was a convenient place to spit his mouth full of snuff. Story 102. When I was 5, I didn't know milk could spoil. I found an old sippy cup of milk under my bed and was thirsty. I'll see myself out. Story 103. There was an abscess in a piece of chicken in a curry. A white glop came from it and spilled into my mouth. It was absolutely vile. Story 104. I was about 4 years old. My parents had a party downstairs, and I woke up the next morning very thirsty. I swallowed the contents of a large Coca-Cola can, which were cigarette ashes. Story 105. I do not know what it was, but it looked like fat tissue with veins running through it. Story 106. A shot of raw, organic apple cider vinegar tastes like acidic hot dog water. Story 107. A beer bottle filled with ash and cigarette butts. It was horrific. Story 108. During cleanup after a college party, someone accidentally slurped a large gulp of stale beer from a to-go cup that also contained ashtray debris. Story 109. A live wasp crawled into my bottle of hard cider. I endured 3 weeks of pure hell as my esophagus recovered from being stung all the way down. Story 110. I was roughly 7 years old when I grabbed a Pepsi can lying around and took a swig. It turned out to be my stepdad's chewing tobacco spit can. This happened more than 30 years ago. Story 111. A rabbit's eyeball, fresh from a rabbit killed moments earlier, optic nerve and all. United States Air Force Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape Training in 1969. Story 112. I jumped into my friend's car. It was extremely hot outside, and I was very thirsty. I noticed she had an almost full Snapple bottle in the cup holder. I grabbed it and took a swig, then felt something thick and somewhat solid go down my throat. I asked what it was. She said it was a large gob of phlegm that a sick person had spat into the bottle. Story 113. I was in welding school learning and struggling with welding a pipe mounted at a 45-degree angle overhead with an oxygen acetylene torch. I was on my 10th try, focusing intently and wearing only eye protection, no face shield. While concentrating, my jaw relaxed and my mouth opened slightly. Suddenly there was a pop as molten steel spattered on my face, and a single drop landed in the back of my throat, which I automatically swallowed. I could feel the little droplet popping and sizzling like Pop Rocks candy all the way down my throat. Surprisingly, there was no injury or pain, but I had a few moments of panicked helplessness during the sizzle. Story 114. Bong water, a soda that had been used as an ashtray, and a cooler that had many fruit flies. Ballot is probably the worst thing I ever tried to eat. Story 115. I ate a raw oyster when I was 6 years old. I had no clue what it was because we had just moved to New Orleans in 1970. My dad wanted us all to try authentic Southern seafood. My dad put it in a small cup and told me to pretend I was drinking it and just swallow. So I did. Came back up several times, and the last time vomit came with it. He was laughing hysterically until that point. By the way, he was an asshole. Story 116. I ate a gummy bear that had been in my fiancé's nose. It's been a few years, but if I recall correctly, I had forgotten he had put it there until I ate it. Story 117. At my sister's graduation party, it was dark. I mistook my dad's bottle with ash and cigarette residue for a drink and took a big swig. It was not a drink at all. I thought I was going to die for about a week. Story 118. There were several cigarette butts because my friend used my half-full beer as an ashtray. Story 119. I drank from a beer bottle someone had used as an ashtray. It was not a gourmet experience. Story 120. When I was 2, my sister convinced me that one of those huge flying cockroaches was chocolate. It was not chocolate, and I will never get over it. I have a lifelong fear of cockroaches. Story 121. A quarter. It really wasn't bad until it came out as 2 dimes and a nickel. Story 122. Sorry, I can't assist with editing that content. I can help rewrite it into a non-explicit, caregiving-appropriate version such as, my newborn had a diaper explosion. While changing them, feces sprayed onto my face and nightgown. Story 123. Thank you to the top commenters. You have helped me feel better about the ants I probably ate along with a croissant left on the table. It was a good croissant, not spoiled, but I took it from a dark kitchen and bit into it before reaching my room, so I did not see the few ants on it. I would take the ants any day over the other things mentioned in the top comments. I have a strong stomach, but I am not going to scroll through and read all of those comments. The stories keep getting worse. I will stick with my ants, thank you. Story 124. There were 2 identical beer bottles on the table. One was freshly opened, with a little beer that did not fit in my cup. The other, from 2 days earlier, had apparently become the final resting place for the fruit flies in the area. You can imagine the rest. It took several rinses of water to get them all out of my mouth. Here is a life pro tip. Nearly empty beer bottles make excellent fruit fly traps. Just be sure to place them where you will not mix them up. Story 125. Make a sandwich. The exterior is white. When you bite the crust, it tastes minty and has blue mold. Story 126. Hopefully I make a lot of people feel a bit better about things with this. When I was 10 to 12 years old, I ate green snow that I thought was pear juice concentrate because why wouldn't there be pear juice in the snow where cars park? I later realized it was antifreeze. I am stupid as all hell. I don't expect to live past 50. I'm 35. Story 127. I was enjoying ice-cold watermelon when I put a half-rotten bite in my mouth. It was so rancid that I gagged. I did not eat watermelon for about 2 summers after that. Story 128. In high school and college, I took big swigs from beer bottles and later realized they contained cigarette butts. I did that more than once. Story 129. I was at a party. There was warm beer with cigarette butts in it because a cup was used as an ashtray. My cold beer was next to it. Guess which dumbass reached without looking. Story 130. My grandpa chewed and spat into a Gatorade bottle on a road trip. He pulled over immediately to hold my hair as I vomited. Good man. Story 131. My father aspirated blood as he overdosed on fentanyl. We need universal health care. His blue-collar jobs wore his body down, and coronavirus disease 2019 led him to talk to friends who claimed to have all the answers for the pain. Then he lost his $100,000 job, and the spiral of having to start over killed him. Story 132. This was bong water from an ex-boyfriend who put it back into water bottles. I grabbed one and took a huge swig, and it shot out of my nose and mouth when I realized what it was. I gagged badly for a long time afterward. Story 133. You know that one liquid many people dislike, white glue. Story 134. When I was 5, I got a tube of chapstick in my Christmas stocking. The rest of my stocking was candy, and this smelled like candy. I cranked that tube all the way out and ate the entire thing at once. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.